Hi, this is John Harcher, and welcome to Season 2 of Keep On Grooving. Overall, this is episode 24, 25 if you count the holiday special. Now, last season, we pretty much took care of all the officially released Hendrix albums, including those from before his days with The Experience, including the squirrely ones. Today, we'll take a look at the last month of his life from the opening of Electric Lady Studios right through the morning of September 18th, 1970. Episode 24, Jimi Hendrix's Last Month. Well, we're still waiting for the Electric Lady Studio box set that got leaked to some websites very early in the year. My pre-order is still sitting on Amazon, so until it's canceled, I'm going to assume it's real and it's coming. As we mentioned in earlier episodes, if it doesn't come out in March, where of course this set was originally going to come out, it'll likely come out in the fall, usually in November, Jimi's birth month. This year would have been Jimi's 80th birthday, so a set like this would have been a good celebration. Instead, it was just announced we'll be getting a revamped reissue of the Los Angeles Forum Show from April 26, 1969. Not as good as a box, but a welcome release. We'll talk about that release more next episode, and the show revolving around it will be out on Jimi's birthday on November 27th, so be on the lookout for that one. Now, once the box set does come out, I'll try to figure out how much of a session-by-session rundown I'll be doing, since the origin of some of the songs he finished mixing there were started back in the early recording days of the Band of Gypsys in November 1969. Just to give a quick rundown of the year 1970, it started off on a high note. Jimi had just been acquitted of a drug charge up in Toronto, and the four Band of Gypsys shows gave enough material to come up with an album to give to Capitol Records. The band continued to record through most of January, but then after the three-song aborted performance in Madison Square Garden, Buddy Miles was fired and Billy Cox went back to Nashville. There was hope on Mike Jeffries' part the Experience would reunite, but apart from a single Rolling Stone interview, they stayed broken up. Once the Band of Gypsys album was finished and delivered, Billy came back from Nashville, and Mitch Mitchell returned for some recording at the record plant, and starting in late April, the trio did a series of weekend shows that would leave them time to work on recording in the studio during the week. In mid-June, Electric Lady Studios was finally ready for operations. Once the box comes out, we'll go over the whole lead-up to its opening. As usual, it wasn't easy. When they weren't on the road, the band spent the end of June and most of July in the studio recording. After heading out for the Rainbow Bridge shows, the band took a couple of weeks off before returning in mid-August for mixing and overdubs. Several marathon mixing sessions took place between August 20th and August 24th, getting a large number of tracks prepared for either final mix or close to it. With all that work done, a party was held on August 26th to celebrate the opening. At the party, a number of people mentioned Jimi seemed distracted. The series of concerts in the spring and summer helped to continue to pay for the studio's construction, as well as the loan Warner Reprise gave them to help finish building. To further help fill the coffers, Mike Jeffries set up a series of European concerts, some in September with another set later in October. This would be the first time Jimi played the continent since January 1969, so there was quite a bit of anticipation for them. The tour would start at the big Isle of Wight festival on August 30th. The show had started in 1968 with bands like Jefferson Airplane, The Move, and T-Rex playing in front of 10,000 people or so. The show expanded to 2 days in 1969 and had headliners like Bob Dylan, The Band, The Who, and Joe Cocker. Another band playing there that year was Fat Mattress, Noel Redding's band. Then in 1970, they staged a giant 4-day festival that ended up attracting between 600 and 700,000 people. The Who returned and were joined by a diverse variety of acts like Miles Davis, Jethro Tull, the Moody Blues, Emerson, Lake and Palmer in their debut, and as a closer like Woodstock, Jimi. As opposed to Woodstock, where Jimi took the stage at dawn, he came on very late at night, like 2 in the morning. There were no lights on the audience, so it was just a sea of blackness with hundreds of thousands of people making noise. Combined with the technical difficulties that happened before and during the set, it wasn't looked at fondly by the band. Billy Cox mentioned he was totally unprepared for the size of it, Mitch Mitchell noted the band had been playing really well together in the studio, reacting off of each other. But this set, he said, just didn't have any feeling to it. As I noted back when we talked about the show, the newer songs tended to be more enthusiastically performed, where some of the older ones were just kind of there. The one exception of the older songs was Red House, which I think was among the better versions of the song he ever did. But overall, the mood was somewhat down, setting the stage for the month to follow. From there, things did not get easier. The Isle of Wight was Sunday night into Monday morning. With the exception of the following Saturday, the band had a gig every night that week. They flew right from the Isle of Wight over to Stockholm to do a concert that evening. Jimmy decided to dig out a few older numbers along with the usual set at the time, adding in Catfish Blues and Come On. They performed another show in Sweden at Liseberg the next night, where he pulled out Killing Floor for the first time in quite a while, and Hear My Train A-Comin' for the only time during this tour. Despite the difficulties, things were going well, at least on stage. This came to a crashing halt at Our House, Denmark on September 2nd. They opened with Freedom, A Message of Love, but then things completely fell apart during Hey Baby, and Jimmy stopped the show and walked off. No one has ever been able to quite pin down exactly what happened here. It could have been just plain old exhaustion. On the way over, people noted Jimmy wasn't feeling well. He could have been sick, or it could have been something more chemically created. There was talk they were having a hard time scoring. And I don't mean coming up with the music for a movie or enjoying feminine company. If you've been doing that and then suddenly aren't, the body does not react well. It's out there as a possibility. However, the next night things were back to normal in Copenhagen. He even did an encore dragging out Fire for It Looks Like the Final Time. The next night in Berlin was another pretty good show. They did Sunshine of Your Love for the final time, as well as an interesting hybrid of Power Soul and Loverman. The brief part of the tour was set to end at a festival at the Isle of Fehmarn in Germany. Now, for these kind of festivals, there's a few different kinds of chaos involved. There's the good kind of chaos, like Woodstock. Things were a mess, but somehow they generally worked out. There's the average chaotic situation, Isle of Wight, Atlanta, Newport Pop from June 1969. You get a lot of people together and things don't always work out, but nothing goes completely out of hand. Then you have the bad ones. You can already name one right off the bat, Altamont. The Isle of Fehmarn falls close to this camp. Germany's version of Hell's Angels had basically taken over the show. Jimmy was actually supposed to perform on Saturday, but tour manager Jerry Stickles got them to let them play on Sunday because it was pouring rain. I haven't talked about Jerry much yet, if at all. I'll look to talk about him more this year. He's a big player involved in the live touring side of the band. So they do their show at Fehmarn and get out of there alive, thankfully, and head back to London. There was talk of more shows later in September and October, but for at least a little while, the tour was done. Unfortunately, sometime during the week, something happened to Billy Cox. Kind of like Our House, no one is quite sure exactly what happened. It could have been anything from a bad dose of drugs. From what I've been able to read, Billy was not really known to be heavily into that aspect of the rock life. It also could have just been the constant pressure around him taking a heavy toll. He ended up having a breakdown and eventually went to his parents in Pennsylvania. I wondered if it might have been a good idea for Jimmy to go back with him, just get Billy to his parents and then go back to New York to work on the album. But the word from people around him at that time and comments in the press during those last weeks says he wasn't happy with what was going on in New York between the pressure of making the album, pay off the studio, and deal with his on and off girlfriend, Devin Wilson. So Jimmy ended up staying in London. He was undecided about what to do at that point. He certainly could have gone back to New York. He also could have done more touring, as Jordan hadn't seen him for the better part of a year and a half. There was the thought of ringing up Noel to see if he'd be up for a reunion. As I mentioned, after the Band of Gypsys breakup, Mike Jeffrey arranged for Jimmy, Noel, and Mitch to do a Rolling Stone interview as a preview to a possible reunion, but Jimmy balked at it, convincing Billy to come back from Nashville again. As a sort of peace offering, Jimmy contributed some sessions Noel was doing for a possible solo album since he'd been kicked out of his own band, Fat Mattress. Nothing came of the album, as did the talk of giving Noel a call. When asked about it later, Redding said he never heard from anyone, but probably would have been up for it. Now, during Jimmy's time in London, it appears his main girlfriend during this stretch was Monica Danneman. She was a figure skater in the early 60s and ended up gravitating towards the burgeoning rock scene. She met Jimmy when he was in Germany for the 1969 dates, then saw him a couple of times over the next few months. Though Devon Wilson is generally thought of Jimmy's girlfriend in the 1969-70 era, he tended to go from girl to girl here and there. That was the scene at the time. Monica was the one who ended up getting him the room at the Samarkand Hotel where he'd mostly spent his final week. While in London, Jimmy ran into journalist Keith Altham and ended up giving him his final interview. Altham didn't find him depressed, but he didn't think he looked well. But Jimmy was talking a lot about his future plans, so he was looking forward to keep on doing things. He ended up hooking back up with Monica on September 15th. The 16th gets a bit messy. Eric Clapton says he was supposed to meet Jimmy at the Sly Stone show. He even had a left-handed Stratocaster to give him, but it appears Jimmy never showed. Jimmy did show up at Ronnie Scott's to jam with Eric Burdon and War on a couple of songs. There's a bootleg of it out there. Somewhere in here, it appears Jimmy and Chaz either met or at the very least talked on the phone. Chaz says Jimmy was asking him to produce him again because he couldn't tell if he was doing anything good or not. Chaz supposedly said he should bring the tapes over and they could have a listen. This aspect is backed up at least in part by Eddie Kramer, who said Jimmy called and asked if he could ship the tapes over to London. Kramer was incredulous. They had this whole studio here for him to work. Why pull everything apart and ship them over to London when they were so close to finishing? This seemed to convince Jimmy, and they left it there. Now, Eddie says Jimmy never mentioned Chaz being involved, and he might have thought differently if he'd known that. Alan Douglas was also in London at the time, and Jimmy asked him to send a message to the now recently deceased Mo Austin that he would definitely deliver the double album and maybe bring Alan in as a producer. Too many producers spoil the broth. Jimmy dropped Alan off at the airport on the 17th, and Jimmy and Monica went out most of the night with friends. There are several versions of what was going on. Monica has one series of events. Alan's wife Stella has another. Eric Burdon and his wife Angie had yet another. Basically, Jimmy was out late, and Monica ended up getting him some point early in the morning to take him back to the Samarkand. Now, according to Monica, they were up until dawn. He ate a little something and had wine, then went to bed. She had the drug Vesperax, which is a very strong sleeping agent. Normal dose is like half a tablet. She says it looked like Jimmy ended up taking 9 of them. In the morning, she went out for a bit, and when she came back, Jimmy wouldn't wake up. She was worried and ended up in touch with Eric Burdon. He says he told her not to call an ambulance, but she did anyway. Burdon says in his book he told her to call the curse word ambulance immediately. But he later said something different. That's how confusing this gets. The call was received at the hospital at 11:18 a.m. and the ambulance showed up at 11:27 a.m. Now, supposedly in those 9 minutes, some people said they came in and buried drugs in the backyard and cleaned up the place. But Jimmy was in bed and at that point, not dead. He arrived at the hospital at 11:45 a.m. and was wheeled into the resuscitation room. Now, if he was already dead at the hotel, the ambulance would not be bringing him to the resuscitation room. They would have taken him right to the morgue. Yet several people are on record saying he did not go right to the morgue. But he did go to a room classified as immediate, meaning he was definitely in a lot of danger when he was brought in. An attempt was made to revive him, but no vital signs ever showed up on the machines. So at that point, he was declared dead. My buddy Purple Jim at his Hendrix Guide site has an enormous page documenting all the conflicting stories and conspiracy theories about that day. Nice guy that he was, he gave me permission to use whatever I wanted for this episode, but it would literally take hours to go over every single piece of information. And it's one of those things it's hard to keep track of who did what, doing just audio. Hell, even videos would be crazy to try to keep track of this. So I'll just briefly discuss a couple of the egregious examples of conspiracy theories and lies and stories that came up. The most famous and longest lasting of the theories is the COINTELPRO one. This was a program that kept track of various pop culture individuals. Now, there is something to it. Just recently, Mickey Dolenz petitioned the FBI to give them all their documents on the Monkees. I guess you don't walk away from Don Kirshner and just get away with it. But the extra part of the theory goes that it ended up killing Jimmy, Brian Jones, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison. I think it even extends to Bruce Lee and John Lennon. Now, the FBI does have a dubious track record here and there, but I just can't go this far. It's just too out there. There's too many other explanations for all these individuals. So let's put that one off to the side. Then there was a thought that Mike Jeffrey was worried Jimmy would sign with someone else when his contract expired in a few months. So he either tried to scare him, like he supposedly did at the Shokin House in 1969, or just took him out altogether. Now, while that would fit into the Mike Jeffrey villain mindset, it doesn't make sense on a bunch of levels. First, they were both in hock to Warner's over the studio no matter what. They needed each other to be successful to get it paid off. Second, as we saw when Jimmy actually did pass away, Jeffrey certainly did not have a plan in place of what to do when Jimmy wasn't there anymore. So why purposely put yourself in this position? Then there was a guy named Dr. Bannister. He claimed he was the doctor who worked on Jimmy in the hospital, which is funny because all the paperwork said it was Dr. Seifert. He said a large amount of wine was pumped out of Jimmy's stomach, yet on all the official paperwork, Jimmy's blood alcohol level was 0. But the strangest part was he said that the body's legs were hanging off the cart by a good 10 inches. A British hospital cart at the time was a little over 6 feet long, so the body on the cart would have been around 7 feet tall. As we can see in the various videos and pictures of Jimmy, he was just under 6 feet. The most generous interpretation is that Dr. Bannister worked on another resuscitation victim and somehow got him mixed up with Jimmy. But the paperwork at the hospital was clear. So why was anyone paying attention to this guy? As a topper, he had his license taken away for fraud, so file this one under... Nope. Now, to get this even more confusing, Monica has told various stories over the years. Eric Burden's story has gone back and forth a few times. Then you had Mitch Mitchell's ex-wife tricking people into saying odd things. At one point, she was working with Jimmy's early London girlfriend, Kathy Etchingham, on a project. Then when Kathy saw she'd been tricked, she went to work trying to undo the damage. It was from her work that a lot of clarity-producing information came to light. With Monica's suicide back in 2015, we'll just never finally get to the bottom of what really happened. But considering we couldn't get to the bottom of it when she was alive, we'll just have to apply Occam's razor. Jimmy's lifestyle and social crowd was very easy with the use of all kinds of drugs for various situations. He even mentioned this in the lyrics of Belly Button Window. You know, we got pills for ills and thrills and even spills. If they wanted to have fun, they'd take something. If they needed to get to sleep and couldn't do so naturally, they'd get help. It was likely this loose view of using drugs of any kind that led to an accident. There are a lot of things that led up to it. Jimmy was very tired over everything that had been going on. He definitely wanted to just take some time to get away from it all. Unfortunately, that simply was not going to happen until the album was done and out. Reprise would have taken either the single or the double. The triple album, People, Hell, and Angels, may have been a stretch. Once the album was out, they would have at least had that income coming in and not so dependent on live dates for money, at least for a little while. The last weeks of Jimmy's life involved a large number of people in Jimmy's sphere of influence. We'll talk a little bit about the most important people in Jimmy's career next time out. Special thanks for this episode to Purple Jim for his site and additional info from the books Electric Gypsy by Caesar Glebeck and Harry Shapiro. Caesar did a lot of his own legwork to get to the bottom of things, as well as Frank Moriarty's Modern Listener's Guide to Jimi Hendrix. It's on sale now, and Frank always updates things on his site, so always check that out. Next episode, we'll take a look at the 10 or 12 most important people in Jimmy's major label career time. It'll depend on how long the episode gets on how many people will make the cut. It'll include a lot of the people we've already talked about so far: Chaz, Eddie, Mike Jeffrey, his bandmates. We'll also talk about people like Jerry Stickles and Eric Barrett, who are important behind the scenes. That's next time on Keep On Grooving. This year we've added Amazon to our distribution platforms of Spotify, Apple, and Google, so please subscribe there if you want to hear these dulcet tones coming out of your Fire Stick. Speaking of Amazon, if you're interested in their Lord of the Rings show, check out my podcast on fantasy and sword and sorcery, Valleys of Numenor. You guys probably get the joke, Numenor being Atlantis and all. I'm John Harchar. Thanks for listening.